My name is Willy Bolander. I study influence, persuasion, and leadership in selling and sales management, and I teach people how to sell. In this podcast, we'll talk to some of the world's top sales leaders and see what we can learn from them. Welcome to the Sales Lab. So, give us a little bit of your background. Where did you go to school? How did you find your way to Boston Scientific? All of that.
Yeah, definitely. So my name is Solomon, and I studied electrical engineering at the University of Texas at San Antonio. So I'm from San Antonio. I went to high school there and stayed there for college. And as soon as I got my electrical engineering degree, I said, I'm ready to start making some money. And I kind of took the first engineering job that came my way. And that was in electrical design. So I was responsible for designing all the electrical systems that went into commercial buildings. And like many typical engineering jobs, I was in an office a lot. I was sitting behind a computer most of the day. And most days I was doing the exact same thing from the time I got there to the time I left. And the repetition of it kind of drove me crazy. I don't like doing the same thing every day. I don't like being at the same place and talking to the same people and kind of having a Groundhog Day life, so to speak. So I kind of tried to find something that was nearly the complete opposite of that. And a friend of mine told me about the job she was doing, which was cardiac rhythm management at Boston Scientific. So that was checking pacemakers and defibrillators, helping with the implants of those devices. And she was telling me every day she's in a different hospital. She's working with physicians and surgery. And so that sounded pretty cool to me. And it also sounded like a way for me to directly see the impact that my work had. In engineering, it's rewarding at the end of a project. You might see a building go up, but in the healthcare field, almost on a daily basis, you get to see the change that you make in people's lives. So I was immediately drawn to that, and I interviewed for the cardiac rhythm management position at Boston Scientific and moved to Houston for that job. And I loved it. And I did that job for about 4 years. It was very technical and learned a lot of sales skills. But then, from there, I had options to branch out into different divisions. So I stayed within cardiology and I moved to the electrophysiology division, which was very exciting. It's a new and up and coming division kind of in the medical field. And it was super challenging, and there wasn't that many people that were a part of this division at Boston Scientific.
This content is brought to you by the TIES Sales Showdown. That's the Technical, Industrial, and Engineering Student Sales Showdown, hosted right here at Texas A&M University. We have over 200 engineering students taking sales classes every semester and a growing minor program in technical sales. These students are smart enough for STEM and savvy enough for sales, and the TIES Showdown allows them to demonstrate their selling skills in a role-play competition where industry partners, like you, serve as judges and provide them coaching feedback. If you're hiring for technical, industrial, or engineering sales roles anytime in the next couple of years, this is an event you can't miss. You can learn more at tx.ag/TIES. That's tx.ag/TIES. Hope you can join us. And give us a little, make that concrete. What is the electrophysiology? What does that entail?
Yeah, no, good question. This is kind of the long-winded answer that I give to people when they ask what you do. What do you do? It's hard to explain, but in the electrophysiology division, we deal with treating cardiac arrhythmias. So a lot of people, they can have fast heartbeats for a number of reasons. It could be a bunch of different arrhythmias. It could be atrial fibrillation, atrial flutter, AVNRT, pathways. There is a whole slew of different possibilities. So when patients are having these fast heart rates, we need to figure out what is going on. What kind of rhythm are you having? So a lot of the times that requires a mapping procedure. So the patient comes in, we put some catheters in the heart, and we start to create a map based on the electrical activation of that chamber. So we can see exactly what is the pattern that your heart is beating in based on the electrical signals it's emitting and the timing of those electrical signals. And once we've identified, what is going on in this heart that's causing it to beat in this way, we need a way to fix that. So that is where the cardiac ablation portion of our job comes in. So you've identified what's going on. Maybe it's some kind of loop that's happening in the heart. Maybe it's some irritable singular spot, and cardiac ablation, and we go in and we destroy it essentially. And there's a couple ways of doing that. One way is to burn that tissue. The other way is to freeze that tissue. And the third way is the newest thing that's kind of in the field of electrophysiology, which is you deliver electrical impulses to it in a specific waveform that causes the cell to create pores. And I can dive into that later, but it's really revolutionized the way we do cardiac ablations.
Okay. Well, this is great context, because I think a lot of people, well, maybe I'm just describing myself. Maybe other people think about that. The first thing that comes to mind when I hear medical devices is, anchors that go into bone to reattach things, or replacement hips, or these sorts of things. But what you're describing is really something that you would use as part of a diagnostic procedure. Well, and the fixing procedure, I guess, as well. But it's not exactly something that you put into the body and just leave in there. It's something that's used and then taken out of the body.
That's a great distinction. Yeah, the patient's not left with any remnants of any technology after we're done. On the cardiac rhythm management side with pacemakers, defibrillators, that is what it was. It was implanting those devices. But electrophysiology is a very different way of operating.
And so what are the actual items that you're selling as part of all of that?
Good question. So it all starts with a mapping system. These are expensive pieces of equipment. They're essentially big computers that are about that size. And they connect all the catheters into this mapping system, and it does all the processing of the information that it's collecting from that heart. So the mapping system is the first thing that gets sold to the hospital. And then to make these procedures work, we need catheters that are going to be in the patient's heart. So each time you do a procedure, you're not going to use the same catheter that was in somebody else's heart. You're going to open up a new catheter, a new mapping catheter, a new ablation catheter. So the initial sale is selling the mapping system, but the real income is from making sure that this physician wants to keep using that mapping system and opening up those disposable catheters.
Okay. That's good to know. And why would a doctor want to use this mapping system? And I guess what I mean is, I guess superficially, or maybe the simple answer is, the doctor would be interested in, something that helps him or her do better with their patients. But I'm guessing there's more to it than that. We can maybe say, yes, that's probably true in most cases, hopefully. But there are probably some other, are there specific problems that your system is able to fix that the doctor might be running into?
That's a great and very complex question. So yes, there's a lot of factors that influence the doctor's decision to use a mapping system. And in a lot of med devices, it doesn't really matter for the doctor whether he uses one device or another device. It's kind of apples to apples, where they all feel the same pretty much. In mapping, they have spent years of training on a single or a couple of mapping systems, and they got very comfortable with that. The catheters have completely different shapes. They move in completely different ways. What you're seeing on your screen, the information is presented to you in very different ways. Now, the level of how complex these mapping catheters might be can vary. Like, for example, Boston Scientific's mapping catheter is a very, very complex high-density catheter. So you can create the most elaborate maps that pick up the tiniest microfractionated signals, extremely low noise floor, can collect data very quickly. But it might be overkill in a lot of applications. And the level of comfort that a physician might have with a much simpler catheter could influence his decision to choose that mapping system. He's used to this maybe less complex mapping catheter, but he can get it wherever he wants, as quick as he wants, and he's very comfortable with looking at what the mapping system is presenting to him. So he fully understands this. Now, he might have some benefits from switching to our mapping system, but it's going to take some level of commitment for him to spend a couple of months relearning techniques on how to use a specific catheter.
Okay. And then so what would the benefits that he or she gets be?
Yeah, so the long-term benefits is the ability to maybe be a little more accurate in your complex procedures. If sometimes that tiny little micro signal that might be 0.05 millivolts can be the difference in understanding a circuit and not understanding a circuit. One mapping catheter can be put there and show absolutely no signals, and we say this area is torched, we don't need to touch it. Whereas you bring in a more complex mapping catheter, and you can see those really, really tiny signals that you're like, you know what, this is the entire issue that we're having in this chamber.
Okay. And if they're more accurate, that means better patient outcomes, I guess?
100%. Yeah, I mean, it could be the difference in the patient not having that rhythm ever again. You found it, you sniped it, or that patient, sorry, we couldn't really find what we were looking for.
Okay. Are there any other problems that are solved by implementing your solution?
There's a lot of problems that are solved on the ablation portion. So the map is the diagnostic part of the procedure, right? So it is how much can we understand? So now if we've understood the problem, now solving the problem, that all goes into our ablation side. And I can definitely speak to the benefits of what we have brought to the ablation market that's completely changed how these procedures are done. Would you like to hear about that?
Yeah, I'd be interested in hearing a little bit about that. Yeah.
All right. I'm just let me know if I'm getting too much in the weeds here, but
absolutely. Well, maybe just tell us like how it used to be done, or the traditional or historical method, and then what's different about the way that your solution works.
Absolutely. So, like we said, mapping is finding out what the problem is. Ablation is what are we going to do to fix it. So fixing it usually requires destroying tissue. That is as plain and simple as it is. It's electrically active tissue that we need to make electrically inactive. So that traditionally is done with RF ablation. So we just heat the tissue to the point where it is not going to recover. So we heat it to 50 degrees Celsius, and that makes it an irrecoverable piece of scar, essentially. And that's great, and it's worked well for decades. And the problem with it, though, is that heat can cause effects that you don't necessarily intend to have. The heart has structures around it. You have the esophagus near it. You have nerves there. And you might be heating the tissue in the heart, but you might also be burning a hole into the esophagus accidentally. So major complication risk. Sorry about that. The dogs are on vacation with us. So, so you might accidentally burn a hole somewhere you're not intending to. And you might destroy nerve cells that you're not intending to. And also, heating up one spot of tissue might be at least 30 seconds of burning in a single location. So we introduced something to the US market last year called FerroPulse. And FerroPulse uses pulsed field ablation technology. So it's electrical impulses that are causing the cells to split. And the beauty of it is that it has no thermal effects. It's cardiac tissue selective, so you're only going to kill cardiac cells, and it happens instantaneously. It takes 2.5 seconds to deliver an electrical lesion that takes out an entire pulmonary vein, for example, versus 30 plus seconds for a single dot with RF ablation. So it's much safer for the patients, and the procedures are becoming a lot more efficient.
So I'm hearing a lot about patient outcomes, which makes me feel good. Are there any financial benefits? I mean, are they saving money in some way by switching to your? And I ask, in a lot of the contexts that we deal with, folks are always trying to quantify the value of their solution. Okay, yeah, my widget has a higher price tag, but it comes with a guarantee and it comes with added service that ends up mitigating the cost downstream, right? I mean, are there any conversations along those lines that you get to have?
Yeah, always. There's definitely always multiple areas that you have to kind of approach sales with, and price is usually at the top of those conversations. So, from a price perspective, a pulse field ablation catheter might be significantly more expensive than an RF catheter, probably 5 times the price. But what we have done to mitigate that is that we have allowed the singular catheter to do both the mapping and the ablation part of the procedure. So this same catheter that can create the map can ablate. So instead of opening up a mapping catheter and an ablation catheter and being charged for both, you're now getting the job done for approximately the same price, but you get this added safety benefit and this added efficiency benefit. So if you're a hospital and your physician was able to do maybe 2 ablation procedures in a day, and now they're doing 5, that's a huge financial incentive for the hospital to take, because efficiency plays into that equation a lot as well.
For sure. And are those numbers, are those examples realistic? I mean, moving from 2 to 5, is that kind of what you see?
I think that's very common to what we have seen.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's significant.
It's very significant.
That's more than double. That's huge. Okay.
Yeah. So it's a win for the hospital because they are getting more patients through. The physician's benefiting because he's having lower complications and higher returns on patients, and just as successful. That's a big piece of it. Is it going to work as well? And if it is just as good, if not better, but that's yet to be proven. But it is easier to prove something to be at least as good. So it is at least as good as what we were doing before. And then the patient, is the biggest winner in all of this, where they have no risk of these thermal effects and other complications.
Yeah, great. And so you said something that I found kind of interesting, because I try to drive this home with the students in the sales engineering class, that when we're talking about sales, if we kind of move up a level of abstraction, we can say influence, persuasion, getting people to do something that they wouldn't have done if you hadn't been there to suggest it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I try to, because many of them will become managers at some point in their career. Hope maybe all of them. And I try to get them to keep in mind that when we're talking about managing, we're also still talking about a persuasion process. In general, maybe I'm just contrarian or something, but I don't think that people do what they want them to do just because you said you want them to do it. I'm pretty sure you have to sell them a little bit. They have to have something at stake. And so I try to really drive the point home that what we're talking about applies to economic transactions, economic exchanges, but it also applies to any time where we're trying to get somebody to change their behavior, right? So it applies to my kids. It applies to employees when you're in management, right? And you're describing earlier the way you were describing having the physician change something that they may have been doing for years and years and be very comfortable with. I'd imagine that that's as hard of a sell, if not a harder sell, than anything on the financial side, or even hey, you could probably convince a physician that the patient outcomes could be better and that the cost makes sense and they could come out ahead, and still get resistance because behavior change is tough. It hurts, even if it's a positive change. It's just really hard. So, is that something that you run into, or how often do you run into that?
Man, you were spot on in a lot of what you said. I never even thought about going to medical sales or any kind of sales for that matter. It was so far away from my horizons. Like, I hate trying to sell anybody on anything and trying to convince anybody of anything. And so I've never done that. I've never done that in my life and my job, and I would be horrible if I tried. Um, but what I can do is I can speak to the physician on their level and understand what their problems are and see if I have something that can either improve or make their lives easier. Um, and if I do, then I'm going to kind of present what I have as an offering. I identify your problem, and this is how I think that we can make your life easier. Um, and on the contrary to that is I can also be the person that says, I understand the problems that you have and I understand why you're choosing this solution. I'm not going to try to push my solution on you if it doesn't make sense. So there has been instances where physicians come to me and like, oh, I want to try this Orion mapping catheter on this procedure. And he's never touched it before in his life. And it might not have been the best patient for him to use it on, and I would be transparent about that. And then he would, it's very rare for a salesman to tell you not to use this product, right? So, but that'll take me longer in my relationship with him and him to trust my advice when I say this can bring you a benefit, because I didn't try to sell him on something that wasn't going to be the best case scenario for him. Um, Relationships are huge, and we're not looking for the one-time sale, we're looking for partnerships. So what might cost you a sale for a week or 2 weeks, but wins the relationship battle, that's a huge factor in it. So every physician has different motivations, different reasoning for why they choose what they choose. The primary objective is to understand what is causing them to make that decision, right? What is their motivating factor? Do they care about patient outcomes more than anything, or do they care about cost, or do they care about clinical trials, or whatever it is? Kind of understand what their goal is as a physician and what their priority list is, and then you can begin to sell to them.
No, I think that's spot on. I had a student bring up I don't remember the person's name, but somebody producing some content on YouTube and social media, and a bunch of videos that say how to sell anything to anybody. And I get riled up about that sort of stuff. What an infantile way of viewing the world. Like my words are so magic that I can just trick people into doing what I want them to. Arrogant, pompous, but I think also just very stupid, very infantile. But we have to kind of dispel that with the students. Not all the students, but some of the students when they come in. Like, no, Texas A&M does not employ me to teach you how to be a bully, to teach you how to be an economic jerk. No, we're talking about, for probably almost half the semester, we talk about the discovery step, which is diagnostic. It's the same thing you do.
Yeah.
Before we jump to a conclusion, we're going to size things up and see if there's a problem we can solve. If there's not a problem we can solve, then we're not going to sell you anything, even if we know all these magic words that would somehow sinisterly allow us to do so. But so I wanted to ask you about the number of, I'm going to use the word accounts. So I don't know if that's the right word in your world, but how many accounts are you actively managing at any given time? Be it, if that's an individual, if that's a facility, however you sort of quantify that and structure that.
Yeah. So I manage the Houston region, so South Texas region, that includes College Station, that includes Lufkin, Texas, that includes Galveston. I have a team of about 17 mappers that cover that area below me. So from those 17 mappers, their day-to-day management is usually at one or two hospitals max. They're gonna go into that hospital in the morning. They're gonna take care of every procedure that we're assigned to. They're gonna take care of the inventory, the schedule, and really run that account for the day. And at most, they might
And
have
when
to
you
do
say
that.
mappers, these are
They are the people that run the mapping system for the physician during these procedures.
Okay. Are those considered a sales role, or just they're there to perform a service and they're technical?
They're clinical specialists. Everybody
Okay.
that works for Boston Scientific, I would say, is sales in some capacity. So they are the physician interface most days, right? It's not the sales rep. It's not myself. It's the person sitting in that chair mapping his procedures. That person needs to be extremely technical because that is pretty much the whole physician experience is based on that person's ability to do their job. And, that was the job I did previous to being the manager. But they are, by title, clinicals. And their job is to run this mapping system and make sure the physician has a good outcome. But that essentially is part of sales.
Okay. And then, so how many, you said they might only be able to visit one or two facilities in a day, but how many overall will they be responsible for?
Yeah, that's a good question. So the way I've structured my team here in Houston is that during training, which takes about 12 months, I send people all over the city. I send them to the north, maybe in the Woodlands. I send them down south. I send them west to every hospital and every physician and see everybody because every physician is going to do things in a different way. They're going to have different maybe expertise on a subject. They might have a different personality that you're going to have to learn to deal with. If from day one I only put you with this physician who's super awesome, doesn't need any help, he's going to make your life easily, he's going to be super nice to you, and that's all you ever know, the second that you have to work with somebody else, you're not equipped to. So training, we send people everywhere, even sometimes to other cities, other states, just to get that complete set of experiences. But then once you are fully trained, usually you're going to be assigned to a territory. So if you break Houston up, it's North Pod, you have the Medical Center Pod, you have a South Pod, and a West Pod. And within each of those pods, there's usually about 10 hospitals in that area, and you have a team of about 5 people. So those 5 people will manage those 10 accounts however they want to do it. But that is kind of how that plays out.
Okay. And I guess the reason I'm asking is pretty small numbers. I mean, to your point about building trust, while it's never, I think, the right approach to imagine that you have endless customers and you can just burn through them, and if you blow one opportunity, you can pick another one up. Well, in your context, there's not new hospitals popping up left and right every couple of weeks, right? I mean, there are very obviously a limited number of potential customers for what you do. So that trust becomes unthinkably important. So I appreciate you bringing that up. So can you walk me through a typical day for somebody in one of these roles?
Yeah, I definitely can. So electrophysiology procedures normally start pretty early. The earliest we start, let's say, is 6 a.m. But on typical start time for a case is 7:30. But our equipment has probably a 30 to 45-minute setup time. So if I'm getting to the hospital 45 minutes before that procedure, I'm usually getting there at around 6:30, 6:45, so that I can connect all my equipment, make sure it's working, make sure I have all the products that I'm going to need for that case. So it starts with setting up the equipment, checking your inventory, making sure the hospital has everything that we're going to possibly need to do this procedure. Checking the schedule for the day. Different procedures are going to require different things. So we get there much before the case start time. And then once everything is in place, the patient rolls into the room and we do our part to put the equipment on them that we need to put on them. And then we do the procedure. A procedure can last from 5 minutes to 6 hours, depending on the kind of procedure that it is and the complexity of what we have to do. And I would say on an average clinical's daily schedule, there's probably about three. So the hospital has three of whatever kind of ablations we need to do. And then once they're completed there for the day, depending on what time it is, I might have them do continued education. So connect with your mentor and study, or maybe download the cases that you had just done and rework them at home on a simulator. But that is pretty much a day in the life. It's getting to the hospital, doing the procedure, and then doing everything that you need to do after the procedure for continued education.
Okay. And in a procedure, you mentioned that there might be some things that your people need to hook up and all of that. Can you walk us through what they're doing in a normal procedure? Because I'm certain that they're not hacking people open. They're not performing the surgery, but they're doing something. So I'm hoping we can create a clear picture of what's happening for them in there.
Yeah. So the only thing that we do to a patient, like from my team standpoint, is we put stickers on them. That's essentially the extent of our interaction with a patient. Setting up equipment means setting up the mapping system in that procedure room. It comes on a big cart, a couple carts actually, and there is maybe 50 different electrical connections that need to be made within that procedure room so that the physician can see what he needs to be seeing. The lab staff gets the information that they need to receive from our system, and connecting each component of the mapping system to itself, right? So we have the mapping system, and then we have where the mapper sits, which is another computer, and all of those need to be connected together. We need to connect the ablation stuff to the mapping stuff. So it is just a lot of wired connections that we need to make. But as far as touching the patient, we just put stickers on them and connect those stickers to our mapping system.
Okay. And then the doctor comes in and begins the procedure. A sales rep for Boston Scientific is just standing there, or do they leave, or what are they doing while the physician is at work?
Yeah, so we are the clinical rep would be sitting in that procedure room. They are at a desk with a computer on it. This computer is receiving all of the information that's going from the patient, the catheters in the patient, to the mapping system that connects to our workstation. So they're sitting on the workstation, and they are responsible for building the map based on the information that they are receiving from those catheters. So we're getting, with every beat of the heart, we might be getting 100 points of data. So we have to filter out kind of what is relevant, what is irrelevant to what we're looking for, and building this map for the physician, and then saying, hey, physician, this is my interpretation of what I'm seeing on this map. This is what I think is happening. Let me try to convince you that this is what is happening. Let me show you the proof that I've gathered. And this is what I think we should do about it. Oh, I think we should ablate this point. So we are very much the wingman of the physician, so to speak. We are a second expert in the room that's identifying what's going on. And we are very vital to the case because we are the ones that build the map.
Okay. So they're not just standing there. They're kind of working in real time, getting data updates into the computer, and then working with the physician to interpret them and
Yes,
come up with the next steps. Okay. Well, that in and of itself almost sounds like a persuasive instance, right? I mean, you're engaging in communication with the physician to determine next steps and come to some agreement about what's being shown on the screen. Okay, so let me get back to the question. The big question driving this conversation. In your world, in your opinion, what is technical sales?
Yeah, I've been trying to think of the best way to answer this question because I knew it was coming. So I think technical sales varies significantly based on the product that you are dealing with. I think when we talked about the med devices that it doesn't matter if a physician uses this or this. At the end of the day, it's the same thing. Um, that might be a very high level of relationship-based sales and persuasion and whatnot. But then you have the complete opposite end of the spectrum. And that is the most complex electrophysiology cases where it does matter the product he's using. And it does matter the level of expertise in the field that the clinical has. So I think when you are dealing with a very complex product in a very complex field, your expertise means everything, right? If I put a clinical that might not necessarily know what he's doing in that procedure, it doesn't matter if you have the best mapping system in the world. Um, the the procedure is probably not going to go well. You're not going to get the outcomes you want. The physician's going to become extremely frustrated, and half the equipment is probably not going to work. So I think above all in what I do, having somebody that's an expert that can be calm under pressure, that knows what they are looking at from an electrophysiology standpoint, because just like the physician has to understand electrophysiology and what's happening in the patient's heart, so do we. We have to know exactly what he's thinking without him even saying it. So we need to be almost at his level when we're having these conversations. So I think that is the biggest factor in whether a physician is going to use us or not. It's how much does he have confidence in our ability to do this?
Okay. So I'm hearing just a very high bar of knowledge and expertise.
Yes, sir.
Okay. That makes sense. And, some of the other folks we talk to, they might be a specialist in widget X, but not widget Y. And, they'll have to do some team selling if somebody is running into a need for widget Y. And I'm imagining that in the operating room, you don't really have a phone a friend option too easily at hand. I mean, you really have to know you're the guy.
That's right. That's right.
Okay. So, what are some of the biggest challenges of a job like this?
Yeah. The biggest challenges are getting to that point, right? Training is not easy and it's not going to happen overnight. So, first 12 months, it's just completely learning and hoping you can reach that level. But you have to really put in that time, even outside of work. There's long hours at work. But even after that, you are a student and you are reading electrophysiology papers, or you are thinking of, oh man, how could this procedure gone better? Let me do some homework on maybe things I didn't know. So the training is extremely difficult. And then the level of stress can be pretty significant because you matter in that procedure and your equipment matters in that procedure. So if if you are not at that level on a certain day, maybe that procedure might not end in success. Put a good mapper in a chair and that procedure might be successful. Put someone that's not at that level yet and that procedure is not going to be successful, no matter how good the physician is and how good your equipment is. So there is a chance of failing. And that is a lot of weight on your shoulders because you're dealing with somebody's quality of life. And then when you're dealing with so many pieces of equipment, there is never a case where there isn't some kind of troubleshooting to make that equipment work. And the time that you're given to troubleshoot that equipment, it's not an hour. You're not sitting there and, testing this and you got your little micrometer testing the voltages. It's you're talking about seconds. Like, can I fix this problem in 30 seconds? Because the physician is going to lose patience. There's an anesthesiologist there and the patient's under, and they're trying to do this procedure as quickly and as efficiently and as safely as possible. So there is a time crunch when those troubleshooting issues come up, and they do all the time. So you have to remain calm with the physician getting upset at you and think clearly of which of these 30 or 50 connections is my issue, or what do I need to do to resolve this?
So heavy burden of expertise, and I'm hearing pretty extreme consequences, right?
That's right.
I mean, uh, yeah, that's interesting. Well, and I'd imagine it's. I mean, it's hard for me to kind of wrap my brain around the idea that the person working for the medical device company has to be at a similar level of knowledge, maybe a little bit more focused, maybe not as broad as the MD, but um, that's hard for me to imagine. Life insurance agents, they go through a licensing procedure, but it's not it's not that it's not like that, right?
Right.
Um, it's I think a bit provocative to tell people, the reps in the medical field have to know their stuff backwards and forwards. So I was able to participate in. We did some sales training years ago when I was at Florida State with a device company, and they said, why don't you come and do the product training week before you start developing the sales training, so that you know anything about anything. And we learned a little bit, but it was, it was fascinating to me that a large portion of what happened in that training was reading medical research studies and interpreting them and critiquing them. And I'm going, okay, well, this is grad school stuff. This is what we did in my PhD program with in regard to social scientific studies. Um, and here you got a bunch of 25-year-old medical device reps analyzing, is this data valid? Is this the best way to test this? Yeah. Why do they do that? Well, because they have to be able to have these conversations with people who interpret those things almost automatically and implicitly, right? That this is just how they live and breathe, and you have to be able to have conversations with people like that. So one of the things that we get to counter, another of the things we get to counter in the sales engineering course is, I always pictured it as a continuum. We have the people who are the maybe type A, cut from the mold salespeople, and their families have always told them, "Oh, you're a born salesperson." And there's a few of those, and they make themselves known, and they know they're going to go into sales, and they're good. And then on the other side, we have the more, pure engineering types who are not at all convinced that they have a role to play in this. They don't think they're going to go into sales. They don't necessarily want to go into sales, but uh, our hope is that through the first several weeks of the semester that they start to realize, okay, I have a role I can play in this. And you mentioned earlier that sales was not on your radar. It was, I'm going to graduate and take a sales job, and yet you found yourself in this role. And I can tell just by this interaction here that you're not what I would think of as an annoyingly expressive, a person that can't speak without flailing their arms in the air and all of this stuff. And so, I'm quite refreshed at this conversation, right? And I think this would be really good to get it in front of the students, and they can see, yeah, of course, sometimes some roles require a salesperson that's hyper and ultra energetic, and some don't just not require that, but that type of a person would completely backfire. You can't slap the surgeon on the back really hard and wink at them. I'd imagine, right? You have to bring the details. You have to be able to back up what you're saying. And so my hope is that some of the students on that other side of the continuum who are thinking, maybe I'm a little too analytical, maybe a little too introverted, are going to maybe hear this conversation and go, oh, okay, well, I could do that. I don't want to knock on, go door to door every day for 14 hours a day. Yeah, me neither. But I could do this role. I could diagnose. I could solve problems. So, okay. Sorry, my coffee's still kicking in. We'll have to cut this part out now too. What else? What else would you want a early 20s, somebody who could come and be part of your team, somebody who could do well in this industry? What would you want them to know that they don't know right now?
Man, you mean from like a knowledge standpoint?
Well, and yeah, from a knowledge standpoint, and then, what's the thing that if they knew now, would cause them to put Boston Scientific at the top of their wish list in terms of jobs?
Yeah, no, I think there's a lot of stagnation in a lot of engineering fields. There is, I mean, everything is growing, right? But at what rate are we growing, and what impact is that growth going to have? I think Boston Scientific has always innovated for the best in patient outcomes, and so with joining Boston Scientific, you would be joining a very rapidly innovative company that is directly impacting patient lives. Um, and I know maybe this isn't the question you asked, but um, what I would encourage someone to come out of an engineering program or any other program with is a hunger to learn, and that hunger never goes away. And if you pick a field that you are not hungry to learn in, you are not going to be successful no matter how smart you are. So what I look for when I'm picking candidates is, does this person actually have interest in what they're seeing? You know, we bring people on field drives when they're interviewing with us. Like, do I see that glimmer in their eye of, wow, this is really cool, and I want to learn more? Like, and asking me questions and going and doing homework on it, because it's not the smartest person. It's not necessarily even the hardest working person that's going to come out on top in this field. It's the person that is the most hungry to learn, that loves this.
The curiosity is an issue that's come up in a lot of these conversations as well. That it's one thing to force yourself begrudgingly to learn a bunch of detailed information, and a completely different thing to hunger for it, to thirst after it. Okay. So if I'm, like you, a double E major or an ID major or something, there's an obvious connection between a biomedical engineering student and a company like this. But if I'm smart and detailed and analytical, and I have a good brain in my head, and I could be good at Boston Scientific, but I haven't really thought about medical devices. I don't really think about biology, physiology. How would I even be able to tell whether I have that curiosity?
You ask enough questions, you look for experiences that maybe you haven't seen before. If you are interested in medical devices, like, pick a part of the body. I've been dealing with the heart for a decade, and I still maybe don't know half of the things that I could possibly know about the cardiology space, even from a medical device standpoint. So, maybe start there and start doing your homework on what kind of procedures are done, and what are the problems that the patients face with maybe their brain or their heart, and does any of that resonate to you? I think everybody has their own story of why they chose the field they chose, but a lot of people, they have very personal connections to it. I have some of my employees got ablations themselves, and then we're like, wow, this really changed my life. And that's what drives them. So yeah, like we've touched on curiosity, but it's seeking out those experiences to maybe see things you haven't seen before, or hear of problems you haven't heard of before.
Great. Well, I know we're coming up on time. I'm trying to think if there's any other ideas we need to capture and record and put out there. Who would not be a good fit for this role?
People that don't like early mornings, people that are very structured and want predictability, and they want their days to have a set start time and a set end time. That is not how this field works. We are on the physician schedule, we're on the patient schedule, we're on the hospital schedule, and nothing we want matters in this equation. So if I need to get to the hospital at 5 a.m. and my day ends at 7 p.m., then that's what it's going to be. And if I had dinner plans, sorry, I can't make it. And that's the toughest part that might not necessarily fit a lot of people. It's not really knowing what time you're going to be home that day. And some days you might start at noon and finish at 3, but you really never know.
That's interesting. Well, I think Well, I would hope I can convince all the early 20s folks that if they're really working hard and throwing elbows and trying to, establish themselves in their career, that should probably be the case no matter where they're working. If
Absolutely.
everything is perfectly in a box and perfectly predictable, then you need to push a little bit harder and find a way to make it a little wilder. I used to have students that would come in and say, "Oh, this I like this job offer better than this job offer because this job offer said I might have to work on Saturdays." And I'm going, "Oh yeah, man, you're 22. You need to be working on Saturdays. Not every Saturday, maybe, but yeah. I mean, what you don't have somebody you can follow up with on a Saturday? You don't have emails you can send out on a Saturday? Nah, come on. You're building something for yourself as much as for your company." So. Well, I really appreciate your time. I think this has been really interesting. I think, my card's on the table. As I mentioned, my hope is to take an interview like this and use it for the normal podcast content. And it ties into a written assignment that the students have to do at the end of the semester, but also try to get it in front of the biomedical students and tell them, come do this minor program. We're not trying to, don't switch majors. In fact, if you switch majors, then you can't do the minor. So really don't switch majors, but come do the minor. We want you to be the best possible version of a biomedical engineering student as possible. We want you to be very well prepared for the job market and professional success. And, I think having people like you connect these dots for them, I think is probably going to be very helpful in that regard.
Yeah, I just wanted to say one more thing if we're still recording.
Sure.
A lot of these engineering students, I was you, and I was the most to myself and introverted person out there, and I wanted to be stuck in a corner doing an engineering job. But that doesn't mean you can't do this, and you can definitely grow. And a lot of, if you're focusing 100% on engineering because you're an engineering major, you're doing it wrong. What really is going to bring you success in any job is being well-rounded from the ability to speak to people and understanding business as well. So definitely look into your communication skills and your business skills. And thanks for having me, Willie. This has been a lot of fun. I hope it's been helpful.
Yeah, very, very much so. I appreciate your time, and I'm glad we could finally connect the dots to get it scheduled with all the chaos on my end. That's it for this interview. I hope you got something valuable out of it. Of course, if you did, be sure to subscribe and rate this podcast on whatever app you use to listen. Also, share this with your colleagues and friends, and let's continue to have a deeper discussion on all things related to selling and sales leadership. See you next time in the Sales Lab.